and a district councillor and a county councillor down in Sussex. And so I'm going to be your MC for this evening's session. It looks like a really interesting and timely session, given that we've have since the local elections we now have a serious contender in the room, and we're talking about reform. And this session will be looking at some local experience of that sort of contest, and then we'll be drawing some lessons and learning nationally, and having hopefully able to take some questions and some have some discussion on that. So I'm going to. It's really great to see people here. I can't see from where I am how many people are in the room. You'll all have come in muted, but we're going to go to. So what we've got in terms of how we're going to kick this off is we're going to have speakers from three local areas. If Jonathan Chilvers is in the room, that would be great because he's one of them. But in the meantime, we're going to start with Chloe Turner, from the leader of Stroud District Council, followed by Sue Brathwaite, Chair of Worcester Greens. So I'd like those two to speak and give us some of their insights from their local experience. And if you'd like to start, Chloe, that would be really great. Are you able to spotlight, Mark, so that we can see some of the speakers?
Lovely. Thank you very much, Johnny. Really nice to be here tonight. So, yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about our recent by-election in the Severn Ward in Stroud District. It's a ward that has been historically right of centre. It's flip-flopped a bit between Conservatives and Labour, but we've never had any Green presence there at all. It's a long way from the other areas where we have a strong Green presence. But we had a snap election, and we responded very quickly to that. And we had good numbers. We managed to find a very credible candidate who had a really good local presence, not in a political sense, but they're a teacher, work in a small business, and subtly well known. And that really helped on the doorstep, being able to talk about who Moya was. And people make funny links, don't they? And sometimes that's all they need to vote, is that, their daughter was at the school where they taught, or whatever that. But to be honest, it wasn't rocket science. We were just using established methods, target to win. We did a lot of early canvassing. From that, the extent of the reform presence became rapidly clear, and quite unexpected. But once we realised it was there, we focused much more attention. We pulled in all the volunteers we could muster. We had really good support from Bristol, who sent some people up to help us, provided a lot of help over the whole short campaign. And we had a very committed local team who just threw everything at it, really. It's quite an area with quite significant solar issues. So obviously positive in one sense, lots of solar development going there, but a lot of questions around agricultural, taking agricultural land and that sort of thing. So we spent some time working up good answers for canvassers to tackle those trickier questions, and that seemed to go down really well on the doorstep. Ultimately, I think our literature was a real strength. We put a lot of effort into making that very tailored to the local area, fantastic photos that really showcased our candidate. And we leafleted early so that we really threw everything at that so that we got good coverage before the postal went out, and that seemed to help a lot. When we saw the numbers coming through on the count, we actually did better on the postals than the rest of the ballots, whereas I think normally that would, Conservatives would tend to do better, or the right wing generally, on the postals. And the other thing we did was a lot of press coverage. We did a couple of paid pieces, but a lot of really good press that helped showcase Moya across a larger area. And then final couple of things. We did Vote Tomorrow cards the night before. We did quite a bit of social media presence across our existing councillors to try and capture the area, because you obviously can't just switch on a social campaign from a standing start for a new candidate. And the final thing we did was quite a lot of aftercare. So in the community afterwards, we distributed thank you cards, and we made sure that our candidate was very visible at the parishes early on, and just did a lot of, trying to convey our thanks, and continue that connection that we'd made on the doorstep during the campaign. I think that's probably all I wanted to say.
Oh, sorry, I've got pop-ups from thank you very much. That's really great, Chloe. Thanks very much. That's really interesting to hear. I think Jonathan Chilvers is in the room now. So if you, Jonathan, if you can prepare yourself. I'm not going to ask you to speak just yet, but Sue's going to come in first. I'm going to move to you, Sue. Sue is the chair of Worcester Greens, and where they've been taking on everybody, I think. So, Sue, do you want to give us your insights from your local experience? That'd be really great. Thank you, Sue.
Lovely. Thanks, Johnny. And yeah, it's really good to be here. And thank you everyone for coming. And I hope there is some kind of gems in our experience. So our recent county campaign came on the back of a citywide campaign last May. So in a way, we didn't stop campaigning. So through everything that we did for across every ward in the city for 2024, we carried on, obviously knowing that these county elections were coming. And I think really that is the kind of the biggest, most kind of basic message, which I think we all kind of know, is like it's this year-round, focus, so that we weren't having in none of our areas where we starting from scratch. So I think it's quite a different situation than what Chloe was bringing us in a way, because we were building with known people in all of these different areas. So a few things that we also that I think marked us out and gave us this almost like a head start around this was that we started early and we declared all our candidates really, really early. Ellie was there for our kind of launch right in the very beginning of January. And we just went out and said, here are all of our candidates. So we were building that all the way through with all of the kind of regular year-round leafleting, with all of the messaging, plus, the regular year-round door knocking, building all of those relationships. So when it came to the short campaign, we were really building on that. And when we look at if you look at the election results for the city elections in 2024, if you look at the number of votes which were for other candidates in which reform might have been included, we were in the sort of across the city. It was 4, 3, 4, 5%. So reform were a tiny number there. So as we came to our planning for the county elections, we weren't deliberately going out there to be messaging against reform, because they came in really, really late. Along with the other parties, they didn't really declare. We had little sight of what they were up to in anything, before the short campaign. So we were really building on all of that momentum that was there. We were able to tailor within each of the divisions the messaging around for different parts of each division, based on what we already know from our city wards, because there were some kind of overlaps there. So in some of the wards or the parts of each division, we were really messaging around, this is between our candidate and Labour, and in some places it was around the Conservatives, but mostly it was either of the two large parties. So we kept that focus all the way through, and even as we started to see reform coming through, we really kept our messaging the same. It's really going to be down to our candidate or whichever one of the others it would be, and we just kept with these core messages of we're here all year round, we're trusted, we're doing things. We also kept up alongside during the short campaign all of the the day-to-day work around, through the social media and all the work that the councillors are doing on a year-round basis. That was kind of happening in parallel to the work that was specifically going on around the campaign itself. So again, that very kind of steady message. And we managed to increase our vote share where whatever happened to the rest of the votes. The Greens, we increased our vote share in all the places that we campaigned in, even when either the Conservatives or were collapsing and Reform were coming up, or there were shifts in the others. We still managed to increase our vote share. And I think, again, it was around this very, very simple, straightforward messaging, which meant that all of our people who were out on the doorsteps, it was very straightforward. So there was nothing complex or complicated, if you like, about what we were trying to do. But it was really that, keeping on with the core messages. And I think, maybe that's the literature then supported that. So we did do some squeeze leaflets right towards the very end when, some of the door knocking data were saying that might be helpful. But really we kept with the kind of regular plan and maintained that all the way through. And I think, some of the things that Chloe's already talked about in terms of like the after kind of care and the thank yous and the rest of it have also, we're building to the next campaign already by maintaining that year-round presence.
Thank you so much. That was really good, really clear, and evidently effective. Can you just quickly say what the result was?
Absolutely. So we had 2 retains, which we did retain, and we increased the vote share in both of those. We had 2 targets, which we won both of those targets, both against, sitting Conservative candidates. And then I have to say, we had 1 development seat, which shifted up to really becoming a target towards the end of our campaign. And we'd chosen, we were very strict with ourselves of not kind of shifting too much, but we did come very agonizingly close with just kind of 26 votes against Labour. And that was very likely the kind of Reform thing right in those kind of, those last days of the campaign. But as I said, it was a development ward, so it was, or division, so it was appropriate.
It's a success on that basis. Thank you so much, Sue. Jonathan Chilvers, are you there? I can see you.
I am indeed, yes.
Can we get you there? We up on screen. Fantastic, Jonathan. Great. So, Jonathan, would you like to share your experience locally and say where that is as well?
Yes. So I'm in Warwick district, and we had county council elections in May. I'm going to just talk briefly about two of our wards or divisions from May. One it's an urban area. It used to be a classic sort of Tory Labour marginal. We didn't deliver anything ever there until January 2024, and then we ended up winning the district seat at a by-election in February 25 and the county seat in May 25, with Reform finished second in both of those times. So, we saw that classic collapse of the Conservative and Labour vote to be replaced by a very strong Reform swing, and it was kind of us keeping Reform out. And then the other one, again, a Labour-facing seat, but which is my one, which is a lot safer seat, but it was one demographically that Reform thought that they could do quite well in. And so that one was much more about us kind of trying to monitor the strength of it and almost getting some practice in about how we reach Reform voters as well. And I think the things that for us kind of united those is, both of them, we ran classic target to win campaigns in terms of the literature and the door knocking. But within that, there was some kind of messaging that we used. We were very, very clear about kind of keeping the outsider status. So in Warwick District, we are now part of the administration. We are running the council, but in all of our language, even when we were talking about achievements from the district council, we still kept that outsider language, that we were going in and we were challenging and that we pushed for things, and it's never we, the council. We're still the outsiders. And actually that's just a very reflection of the truth, in that we've gone into the council, and although we are in one sense we're the insiders because they're there, but actually the challenge and the push that we're providing is just completely new to the council and is still very different to our Labour colleagues who we're in administration with. So keeping the outsider status was the first one. The second was, I think we kind of upped our punchiness in our messaging. Our candidate in the Warwick North seat, where we went from nothing to winning in just over a year, is naturally quite pugnacious in the messaging, but also in South Leamington, where maybe I'm slightly less naturally like that, we were deliberately punchier and clearer. And some of the messages that worked were, you know, with the cancellation, some places being cancelled, elections being cancelled, you know, I deliberately went out and said, look, this was the power grab to try and cancel the elections. That's what it was. And that kind of saying it how it is language we found really goes down well with Reform voters, and on the doorstep, not being frightened to say if something's a mess, or is really just being really clear and using quite colourful language. I think that takes some preparation, because you've got to be clear about what you're doing and choosing a topic well. But I think that was very effective for us. And then thirdly, in terms of some of the topics we covered, you know, we did kind of make sure we covered things like crime and antisocial behaviour. You know, safer, cleaner streets was one of our kind of big messages. And we've had some good stories, constructed good stories to tell about what we'd done to challenge antisocial behaviour and bring in more funding. And we really leaned into those. So outside of status, punchier, and those kind of slightly tailored messages. And then the door knocking, to quote Helen Heathfield, we kept saying, stay curious. If you find, and it is trying to change the mindset of some of our door knockers, if you find a Reform voter, that's a victory. Like if somebody's talking to you and engaging with you, you should be really pleased, because actually we need to get good at working with and reaching people that Reform voters. And we kind of went through kind of, not all Reform voters are the same. We had some people going, oh yeah, it's either you or Reform, and sometimes just the classic local national message worked very well. But you also got the GB News conspiracy theorist, and with those ones it tended to be the more punchy language and saying, you know, what's going on at Westminster is a disaster. We agree that the system is broken. That kind of finding that point of connection in, we agree with the diagnosis, even if we don't agree about the solution. And so we kind of began to work on different messages, but basically it's kind of do that listening and absorbing first and bite your tongue, and then try and find those points of connection. And then the third thing I wanted to say was about kind of also knowing when not to worry about Reform. Because, and this was maybe something I wasn't so good at, but we did, you know, I went and actually bought some data, which from electoral calculus, who are rubbish at predicting where Green votes are, but actually they made a fairly good, very localized effort of where the Reform vote was. And then we kind of used that to work out what our worst case scenario with Reform was, just to kind of provide some reassurance for us, which was proved quite accurate. And one of the things I was most pleased about is that in most of our target divisions, we relatively accurately predicted what the Reform vote would be. How much did the election data cost? It was not very much. It was in the like £10 to £20 range, I think. And so just helping us to understand that, you know, actually in some wards, like one of our most marginal Tory facing wards, we were confident that reform would split the vote without becoming a threat. And so actually, reform are actually quite helpful politically until they're not, because they've kind of got over that threshold. And so to try and judge that was kind of a constant thought. And also learning from previous campaigns and what people had said is that to expect that late charge, we plan thinking we know this late charge for reform will come, and then trying to work out in which areas we need to counter that. And as Chloe and Sue have said, is like being out on the front foot. So I think that's about it. Oh, electoral calculus. As I say, they're really rubbish at knowing where the Green vote is, but actually on some of the other parties, they're pretty good.
So thanks for that, Jonathan. I liked your observation there about electoral calculus, because they're generally not very good about judging us, but good about judging everybody else, it seems. So that's handy. Thank you very much for that. And did you tell us what the results were? You're muted though, so you might want to unmute before you speak.
Mute. Yep. So we had 3 that we retained, and then we won 3 more. So we kind of in Warwick district, and then we also in the north of Warwickshire, Keith Kondaker won a seat back from the Tories, and again he was the only in the north of Warwickshire. It was a Reform clean sweep apart from that one Green seat. So he was like a little island of green on the map. And then we in the south in Stratford, we just missed out. We finished second in a Conservative facing seat, but we're pretty confident that we prevented Reform winning that seat. So that was our big disappointment, that we didn't quite get that one over.
Good question. Was that a target, or was it a development?
No, that was a target for the Stratford party.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Jonathan, and thanks to all our speakers so far, Chloe, Sue, and Jonathan. I'd like to ramp it up a bit now, if you like, moving from the local to the national. I'm going to be inviting Ellie Chowns, who's the MP for North Herefordshire. I never quite remember that straight away. And then Adrian, who is the MP for Waveney Valley in Suffolk, to see if they can segue from the local learning into national picture, to see if they can draw any conclusions out of that or any lines of thought. I'll go to Ellie first, if that's all right. And welcome to you both. Sorry, I've welcomed you both. So I'm really pleased to see you. Really pleased you could join us for this interesting session. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks so much, Johnny. And first of all, absolutely huge thanks to Chloe and Sue, and of course to Jonathan, for really, really fascinating insights into what's been happening in your local campaigns. And I mean, Johnny, you were saying kind of segue into the national picture, and I'm just, the phrase that comes to mind is all politics is local, right? And I think, those stories are really, really interesting, because each of them had a slightly different character. The campaigns had slightly different character, but also there were some real kind of consistent themes. I've been writing notes madly, and also just reflecting on a few themes that I heard coming out. So I'll sort of share those and a few reflections. I mean, first of all, targeting, it's essential to how we win elections, right? We know that. And, really great to hear all of you talking about exactly how important that is in your campaigning, and the importance of knowing your voters and tailoring your messaging. And actually, I just wanted to ask a question to you all, which was just about the Reform campaigns in your areas. Were you finding that the Reform messaging there was kind of national, loudhailer, same old couple of slogans, stop the boats, even though local government's got nothing whatsoever to do with border policy? Were you finding there was any sort of localization of that, or personalization, or even personal attacks on your candidates? I'm really interested to know. I saw Sue unmuted.
The former. So any literature that we saw was very much the big national concerns. We couldn't find there was nothing local. The people weren't known. There was nothing about what's happening here in Worcester. It was very much that big picture stuff. And the candidates came in so late into the campaign, they were completely unknown across all of the divisions.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, so I thought Reform in Warwickshire ran an amazing campaign. I thought they were incredibly professional and clever in what they did, and some of that was obviously driven from the National Party. And they kind of, on their leaflets, they had one side national and the other side local, or they divided it into two. But they were also quite clever at taking the national issue and at least bringing it down to a Warwickshire level, even if it wasn't an individual ward level. On things like delaying the elections. And I'm sure probably a lot of you have seen the postal vote letter that went out, which I thought went out to all postal voters like across the country, but certainly all postal voters in Warwickshire got it. And that was an incredibly clever letter that linked the national and the local, incredibly punchy. So I just thought that they ran a really very clever campaign, and we got some like isolated local attacks as well, but but actually that's not what won them the seats that they won.
Right, thanks, Jonathan. And Chloe, what about in yours?
Yeah, for us, so the reform literature was pretty simplistic. It was just the basic national messages, so no attempt to link to the local. There was some, the kind of people who perhaps have always been waiting for reform to come along and were delighted and flags all over the place, but they were in a minority. The majority of the people who were talking about voting for reform on the doorstep, we saw from the numbers, were actually probably previous Labour voters, because the seat was most recently Labour, and that vote just fell off a cliff. And some of the Conservative vote went across as well. So really people fed up with Starmer, fed up with politics, and actually quite open to considering, oh, okay, I didn't realise Green was an option. So the conversations on the doorstep were incredibly valuable and really linking it to community and local conversation.
Thanks, Chloe. That's so interesting. It does sound a bit like in Worcester and Stroud there was a bit of a kind of commonality, whereas in Warwickshire it was a bit more targeted. But I think, what's coming through also from your comments just here is that the people involved in the campaign are so important. So the candidates, Chloe, you talked about, how important it was to have a great locally rooted candidate. I know the same's the case in the other places. Such a contrast with the reform approach, and also the huge team effort. Chloe, you were talking about people coming in from outside, from helping you from Bristol. We all know it takes a huge amount of effort to win an election. It's a very motivating and mobilizing thing, isn't it? And particularly when you've got an opponent, a political opponent that we are so very, very passionate about opposing. So some really important lessons there about people, and just, I feel so proud all the time of the caliber of people involved in the Green Party at every level, and that really shines through from what you were talking about. And then the comms, I thought, Jonathan, you were making a really useful point there about kind of emphasizing we are not the establishment. We are, we're on the side of the people. We are the kind of, we're the insurgents, we're the campaigners. We're never kind of justifying what the council has done for people. We're always about being on people's side, trying to make the council work better. And I think personally, I've seen fantastic, very nuanced and clever messaging from Green campaigns, including, as I'm thinking of a very specific thing in Worcester actually around that as well. And I thought it was interesting what Jonathan was saying about upping the punchiness in comms, because I'm somebody, like, my politics is all about kind of reducing polarization, bringing people together, kind of, not doing the kind of argy-bargy, because of course that's what turns people off politics so much. I've lost count of how many people I've met on the doorstep that have said, oh, I can't bear the way they all shout at each other. Why can't they get around a table and have a nice conversation? And then at the same time, actually, people quite often quite like the punchiness or the clarity of really clear comms that makes it clear they stand for that, we stand for this. Obviously, we're with you, you're with us. Vote for us. So I think there's really a kind of important lessons to think about there, and I have to. Absolutely, we're thinking about them all of the time as individuals in our campaigning and speaking in Parliament, and so forth. But there's just something about being, having the courage of our convictions. For me, that's what it's about. It's like, it's not just about argy-bargy, punch and sort of fight, and that's quite sort of forceful language, isn't it? But I really like the phrase having the courage of our convictions, because for me, that's what green politics is about. We have huge levels of conviction. We believe so passionately in what we stand for. And my own experience of campaigning has been absolutely that conviction is what convinces others. And the frustration is if very simplified language, simplified campaigning slogans that we might see from Reform, connects to somebody who's just feeling so frustrated, hasn't got the headspace to kind of give loads and loads of thought for politics, but just thinks, oh my goodness, Labour's totally let us down. The rest of them are a bunch of charlatans. Oh, here's this leaflet from Reform that kind of appears to offer simplified solutions. All right, then. I think that the core of what we offer as green campaigns, and what I've heard from what you've been saying there, is this passion and this rootedness and this ability to kind of express our convictions in a way that brings people along with us. And there's machinery that is how we do that, the machinery of Target to Win, the machinery of huge teams of volunteers and activists coming together to support a candidate, because we've got to have fantastic candidates, but we've got to have amazing teams behind them supporting them. So all of that really, really comes through. And then I love that phrase, Jonathan, you said at the end about staying curious about why people vote Reform. And I suspect that the reasons why people are attracted to Reform change, right? Because it's not a mystery to me. It's not kind of surprising that we saw a big boost in Reform votes in the May local elections, when there's been a year of a Labour government that people feel so let down by. There was all of this hope last year and all gone. Conservatives are still in an absolute mess. So in that sense, kind of staying curious about what motivates people and connecting with those underlying frustrations and showing how our convictions have much more convincing analysis underneath them to bring people along with us. And I can think of umpteen one-to-one conversations I've had with voters on the doorstep that have been of that character. I'm sure all of you feel exactly the same. So everything that you've said, for me, it boils down to this kind of courage of our convictions message, and the incredible team effort that we are able to mobilise as Greens, and the focus, the local focus, the conversational character of the way that we do politics, which stands in such stark contrast to the kind of loud hailer character of Reform politics. And we know that it works. We know that's how we beat Reform.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ellie. Really great to he's joining some of those dots up. And I'm going to go to you now, Adrian. If you can give us your thoughts, that would be really helpful. Thanks so much. Thanks, Ellie.
Thanks, Johnny. And great to see everybody here, and looking forward to a discussion in a bit. And thank you so much to Chloe, Jonathan and Sue for your really interesting insights, and congratulations on fantastic campaigns. I'll pick up on a couple of points as well, and then widen it out into the national picture as Johnny's invited us to do. And I was also going to pick up on your point, Jonathan, about making sure that you continue to have an outsider's perspective. And I tried to do that very strongly in my campaign when I was elected as an MP. I communicated that through repeatedly using the phrase, I'll be Waveney Valley's voice in Westminster, not Westminster's voice in Waveney Valley, because people had felt for so long that they'd had an MP that had not been visible, that had not been a champion for their local community, their local concerns. And that was something that was felt regardless of people's political backgrounds. And so, 1 year on, and we've all been talking about what it's been like a year into our roles, I've been showing how I have been doing that. And I think that is really important for how we all operate, including, as you say, Jonathan, even if you're part of running the council. I remember when I was a councillor in Norwich and we built up quite a big group of councillors. We were still opposition, but we had quite a big group of councillors. I always used to say to my colleagues, do not wear your council branded lanyard when you go door knocking, because you do not want to be perceived as from the council. Councils are never popular. Individual councillors often are, and you want to be seen as a champion of your community, or maybe from the Green Party, but you don't want to be seen as from the council. That's really not going to help you at all. So I think, even if you're in power, it's the same point still applies, as Jonathan was saying, getting across how you're being a champion. So I think that's one reflection I would take from what you've said, that very much is reflected in the Target to Win handbook. And another thing that's reflected in there is something Chloe said, I think you all said actually, around the importance of starting from where people are starting from, around really listening, engaging, not writing people off, as you've all said. There's a whole range of reasons why people might be voting the way they are. Engage, try and understand, look for common ground, as you've all said. But that listening is so important. And it's really interesting that those principles that Chris Williams and I wrote into the How to Win Local Elections manual when we wrote it 11 years ago or whenever it was, they're still applying now, when we've got so many more councillors, that we've had something like an 8-fold increase in our councillor numbers from then. And I think it's particularly true if you look at why people are voting for reform, that, as Ellie said, that we do understand why, actually. And that in terms of people feeling utterly let down and disillusioned by a mainstream system that's failed them, and particularly left behind the poorest people, the most disadvantaged people in our society, we understand that. Those are the people we're speaking up for in Parliament every week, whether it's disability benefit cuts to special educational needs funding, or whatever else. So absolutely, we've got to get that point across clearly. So what does this mean for our challenge nationally? Well, I think it's interesting in the discussion between Ellie and Jonathan around, when are you punchy, when are you more collaborative, I think is an interesting one, because to me, we do offer an antidote to reform, and part of that antidote is not just that we're completely different on our policy platform, but that our style is completely different. And actually, there are loads of people out there, as Ellie was saying, and it's certainly my experience, who desperately do not want a sort of populist style of politics that's just about headline grabbing. I mean, we saw under the Boris Johnson government what that government by headline grabbing does when there's no coherent policy program behind it, and where it's just so divisive. I mean, that's the other feature of populism, isn't it? It's so divisive, so polarizing. So the fact that we're not just listening, but then offering actual real solutions that can have a real impact is one of the other ways in which I strongly believe that we're a real antidote. And the fact that we're the Green Party, that not only has a really distinctive policy platform, and we have the highest favourability ratings of any party that we've all built up over recent years, but we also have a set of political values and culture that's so different to the others. Being very bottom up, being very open in the ways that we have respectful dialogue between each other and with the public. And I think that's how we win lasting trust, in a way that's very different to the sort of roller coaster of support that parties like Reform, and for that matter Labour, if the last year is anything to go by, tend to see. So in terms of where we go next, I mean, I'm extremely proud of what we've all achieved, everyone in this room, all our staff, all our volunteers, all our field organisers, of the record-breaking success. And it is truly transformational what we've achieved in recent years. We've doubled our number of councillors. We've quadrupled our number of MPs in the time that Cllr and I have been co-leaders. But what we want to do now, in terms of that huge step up to the next level, it's what we've heard today, in my view, really reinforces that it's got to be about building on the reasons why we've had that success. It can't be about throwing it out of the window and going off on a different track. We've got to build on core Green Party values, Green Party culture, as I've described, and really engage with people in a positive, constructive, respectful way, internally as well as externally. And I think if we really show clearly where we stand, that we're listening, we scale up those effective tactics on the ground, we can win many more seats at the next general election as well. And then, we could really be in pole position for influencing the shape of the next government. So thank you for all you've shared. And it really leaves me very enthused about the potential for us to really scale up even further.
Thanks so much, Adrian. Thank you very much for that. And building on that question, I'm going to first of all invite people to start putting questions in the chat, and we'll draw out some of those for consideration later. But in the meantime, just for ask you, Adrian, and you, Ellie, just take it about that path to more MPs. Can you just outline a bit more about how you see us taking those next steps towards the next general election?
Absolutely. Shall I start, Ellie, on this one?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Thank you, Adrian.
Well, I think, as I say, we've got to build on the success that we have had. And so it is about doing what we did in 2024, but on a bigger scale. And I really want to do it on a bigger scale because that's what the state of the world demands. That's what communities are looking for. And the potential to push British politics in a different direction. I mean, imagine we have a situation at the next general election where Labour are a bit short of a majority and there's enough Green seats there for us to have a real influence on the shape of the next government. And if the alternative is some disastrous, horrible, reform-led government or coalition, then, every extra seat we can win to get us in that position will be absolutely worth it. So the party's going through a process at the moment where every local party's had the opportunity, or has got the opportunity right now, to bid to be a development seat, and many of those will become target seats. That's the process we went through last time round, but we're doing it at a bigger scale now, and we've got a highly skilled field team, many of whom have been through the general election, and we're making sure we capture that success in the way that we've now done with our successes for local elections. And then we've got to scale up the operations. Every element of what we do as a party has got to be able to operate at a bigger level. That's about how we mobilise volunteers and members. It's also about fundraising, something I've done a lot of for the party and for charities I've led over time, and we've got to do at scale as well as growing the membership. And then we've got to scale up our comms. And, we heard Ellie and Jonathan talking about this just now. And I know one idea that Ellie and I have put forward is we would like to see if the party can raise the money, which we will play a key role in, starting to move towards a much better resourced comms function. It's a great job with the resources it's got, but it's something that's in time closer to what we have for the field team, where it's this support for local parties doing the comms around the country. So there's a number of ingredients there, and I'm really excited about what that looks like, and I'm sure Ellie will add some other dimensions to it.
Thanks so much, Adrian. Ellie, have you got anything else to add to that? There's a lot in what Adrian just said.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, basically what Adrian said, absolutely. I'm hugely ambitious, Adrian is as well, about the next general election. And the thing is, we know what to do. It really is about replicating that, because we were so successful last time. We aimed for 4, we got 4. We know how to do it in a bunch of different types of areas and demographics, right? We know what to do, and it's exactly the same as Sue and Chloe and Jonathan have just described at the local level. And I feel really, really positive about it. And the reason is because it's all about convincing people that if they vote Green, they can get Green. That's the thing we've got to do. We have, as Adrian said, we've got this hugely favourable public opinion about us. People know that the Greens are people with integrity, people that they can trust, not your usual kind of style of politician. So maintaining that public trust, and also enabling people to trust that if they vote Green, they can get Green. That's the key thing. And that's why it's so powerful what we've done with our 4 kind of pilot project MPs, if you like. And I would like to, I would honestly like to see several target seats in every region. Maybe that's obviously to be debated later on and to be discussed through the process that Adrian has talked about. But there is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be winning MPs in every region of the country. And the prize is huge. The project is already underway. You know, like Adrian says, here, 4 years out, we're already recruiting the campaigners, the target areas. And it's about the candidates, it's about the campaign managers. Oh my goodness, if there's one person who's important in the general election campaign, it's the campaign managers, the people behind the scenes. And then it's about the team, creating that huge team. And that's something that I've seen, you know, it was so enthusing to see how we could do it at a local level, how we could raise funds at a local level, how we could energize people at a local level. We absolutely, it's totally doable to replicate that. And so, yeah, more of the same and even bigger and better.
That's brilliant. So we're going to go to some questions if we can. I'm just going to look through the chat. Yeah, so I've got a question here from Mark in Brighton. How do we campaign against reform in places like Brighton, where he stood in 2023, Bristol, etc., where we are definitely seen as established, if not establishment? So I think it's that question about it. How do you show insurgency when you're, you know, seen as maybe part of the mainstream in those places? And I wonder if what your thoughts are on that, in particularly when it comes to parliamentary things. Ellie, were you trying to answer there?
I mean, I've just answering completely honestly from the gut, right? And I mean, my brother lives in Brighton. I went to university in Brighton. I spent a bit of time there these days, but not hugely. So I don't hugely know Brighton. But, you know, Caroline did an amazing job of getting ever larger chunks of the vote, while becoming ever more established as an MP and still absolutely being seen totally as anti-establishment. So I don't think there's necessarily a tension there. I think it's absolutely clear that Sian and Cllr are, although they're really well established and they've got a strong vote share and the Green Party is well established in those areas, Sian and Cllr are absolutely at the forefront of kind of campaigning against the terrible things that the government is doing. You know, Sian's going to be literally leading the charge in Parliament tomorrow on the PIP and Universal Credit Bill against what the government is doing there. So I think that as Greens, we occupy a really interesting and very valuable place in the political spectrum, because we combine that kind of sense of trust, that recognition that we do good things with, you know, power and influence when we have it, and also that courage of our convictions, that focus on speaking truth to power, that long-term focus on what it is that how we want to change the world. You know, we really want to change the world. So without experience of exactly what Reform are doing or saying in places like Brighton, I mean, I suppose I would be quite surprised if Reform had a huge breakthrough in a place like Brighton, to be honest. But one must never take anything for granted, of course.
No, certainly not. So I've got another question for you guys from Debbie. I don't know which Debbie, but Debbie, we need to drive up youth engagement. We're hearing from younger influencers like Ash Saki and I can't see the next bit.
Ash Sarker and Grace Blakely.
Okay. So and how we speak and how we speak a bit more bluntly. And I think it's something that maybe Jonathan mentioned earlier on a bit. So have you got anything to add in that flavour? Because I think that touched on it, but maybe there's something more to say about it. Do you want to say something, Ellie? Have you got any thoughts?
Me? Yes. So, I mean, I think it's about being yourself, right? I don't think it's, I would much rather communicate as myself clearly about what I believe. So, for example, I was on local telly on Sunday and was being asked about, it's in Warwickshire, actually, the Reform people in Warwickshire doing lots of silly, ridiculous stuff about pride flags. And I was kind of saying, you know, this is performative politics. And I got into my P alliteration and I said, it's frankly pretty pathetic. And suddenly there's an article on the BBC about, you know, Green Party says, you know, the flag stuff is pathetic, which is, it's just speaking directly, right? So I think people appreciate politicians who speak, who say what they believe. But I think that, you know, it's really interesting that anybody would think that being green is not about being bold, because We just are. It's in our DNA. I mean, if you look at what I've been saying in Parliament over the last year, I have been banging on about wealth tax and Gaza and, calling out the government's terrible policies, left, right and centre. So I think it's actually central to Green DNA to be bold. We have been at the forefront of campaigning for proper climate action and nature protection. Those are bold positions. And finally, people start catching up and then there's a pushback against it. But we are still being bold on those things. And it is by being bold, having the courage of our convictions, that we bring people along with us. So at the same time, I'm not sure that being bold is incompatible with being polite. Do you know what I mean? I don't think you have to be rude to be outspoken. I think you can be really clear and really courageous and really bold, and at the same time with a tone, with a character that stays totally rooted in that approach that has built such trust for the Green brand, because it is about understanding that we are passionate about things, and that passion is rooted in fundamental principles and in a commitment to bringing people along with us. So it's a little bit, it's a little bit nuanced, but politics is about nuance. So for me personally, I don't feel that there's a contradiction between boldness and outspokenness and clarity, and at the same time speaking in a way that people are able to respond to. Because going back to what Chloe and Sue and Jonathan were saying, you have to understand your audience. This is one of the very first lessons I learned at one of my very first Green Party training sessions at a West Midlands regional conference, about connecting what you want to say with what people want to hear. And yeah, I think we're all having to do that naturally all the time.
Thank you so much, Ellie, and that's expanded a lot on what was said earlier on. I'm going to skip to Adrian now and ask him the next question, which is about what's the benefits, importance. This is a paraphrasing from a question that's come from Ian from Worthing about what's the benefit of scrutinising and reporting on the actual delivery by reform in local councils. So what, how do it scrutiny, reform watch, so what's the benefits of that? And is there anything to be learned from paying close attention?
Thank you. Hi, Ian. Good to see you. And yes, setting up a reform watch, I think, would be a good idea, and that would certainly keep some people busy. I've been asked about this in regional TV interviews where we've got some reform councillors in influential positions of what impact are they actually going to have, and even basic things like, well, there's one council where they haven't managed to have any meetings yet because the leader's on holiday and none of them really know what they're doing, and lots of them haven't filled in their register of interest, and all sorts of basic things early on, just because you've got, in some cases, 50 plus reform councillors who are all new. Most of them nearly all of them have never been councillors before. And I think it is going to be really important for us and the media to get across that actually they're not serious. And of course, you could elect people who are elected just based on a lot of bluster in the national media, but there's no local platform. The candidates haven't been through the proper process of campaigning locally to win. But you won't get diligent local ward councillors, and you certainly won't get competently run administration that way. And I think people will start to see that. I mean, there was another reform councillor elected in May in Doncaster who resigned today. There's been a string of these, haven't there? And a couple of the recent by-elections last week, they lost, unsurprisingly, because voters are going to punish that. We need to be ready for that if reform have won in areas where we would be well placed to win the by-elections. So yes, absolutely, we do need to be ready to point those things out, because it's a way of getting across that Greens have a very different way of doing things. And that's why I don't think we should just be the mirror image of reform, as some people have suggested. I think we need to be proud of the fact that we have a different approach to politics, which includes being rooted in communities, offering people real solutions, and actually being serious about doing a good job.
I'm going to do a segue to a slightly, a nuanced version of a similar question. That is there a risk? This is from Diana at Toynbee in Herefordshire. Is there a risk that focusing on taking the fight to reform gives oxygen to them and feeds their love of anti-green discourse, making reform appear stronger than they are? What are your thoughts on that?
Thoughtful question, Dan. I mean, I certainly think that it's not helpful that environmental issues have become a political football, and actually we for the sake of the wider movement, we need to move away from that, which is another reason why I'm not keen on the populist approach, because approaches that are polarizing inevitably push people away from you, and we've got to build wide public support for our agenda for the Green movement to be successful. That's always the approach I've taken in my 27 years or however long it is now in the party, that we've got to build wide support for what we stand for. So I think that is really important. I think when we talk about taking the fight to them, a lot of it's about recognising that they will be a main challenger in a number of the seats that we are already going for or want to go for. Whether we're then explicitly taking them on, I think, will depend on the tactics on the ground. It sounded like from some of the stories we were hearing from our speakers earlier on, I think at least one of you said, that you didn't necessarily plan the campaign in a way that was expecting reform to be the main challenger, but we did make sure, we were doing the best job of being strong local representatives, communicating the message in a really clear and punchy way, etc. And I think especially where you've got deprived communities, and I've got a long track record of winning council seats in working class areas in Norwich, you've really got to listen to people and engage.
So that's really great. And I think I heard earlier on about how actually it's that engagement on the doorstep and listening to where people are at. It's a bit like proper community development, isn't it? You go to where people are already meeting. You don't have a meeting, put on a special meeting to get people to come to you. You go to where people are and listen to where they're at, and you address and you message accordingly. It's not about you changing your direction, but you message according to how they can hear where you're coming from at that time. And I think something I heard about about the not just the punchier and tailored messaging, which was significant earlier. I thought that was quite important. It was just about making sure that you heard the issues that matter to people on the doorstep. It's true target to win stuff. And I wonder how you see that applying to, how do you do target to win? We're at such a great scale of doing the trying to get how many MPs next time? Dozens. So have you got any thoughts? So Ellie or Adrian, I don't mind who. Any thoughts about how you turn the target to win at that scale into a really fully functioning target to win campaign, using the traditional methods that we know work on the doorstep? Sorry, it's a bit big, a bit long-winded, that.
Yeah, no. I think I get what you're saying, Johnny. And just thinking about my own general election campaign, right? It was absolutely a target to win campaign, and it was a campaign in which I'm clearly a Green Party representative. There's a Green Party manifesto, and all of our messaging locally was about the kind of things that people really care about locally, the most salient things locally, and really, really focusing on them. So, for example, restoring our rivers. I had a big focus in my election campaign on river pollution because it's a huge issue in my area. And of course, that's totally compatible with what green politics is all about. There's no kind of inconsistency there or anything, but the messaging, when you're doing a targeted campaign, you're focusing on specific issues that are particularly salient to the people that you've spoken to. And you find out what they are by asking people what it is that they care about. So of course, if we're running, dozens of general election campaigns, target campaigns next time at constituency level, each candidate will have specific things that they are concerned about. And what's most important in I don't know, somewhere like Hackney that's got pretty decent public transport compared to somewhere like Herefordshire that really definitely hasn't. Issues like transport will be, you need to speak about fundamental green views and policies on transport in a different way to speak to each of those audiences. But I think that, the kind of the core thing, I've been looking at this, there was a question somebody put in the chat about kind of, we've got more complex and nuanced messages than reform, and how do we kind of tailor them, how do we challenge the simplisticness of reform messaging? And again, I think it is partly horses for courses, right? So one thing is the way that they will take a very simplistic statistic and kind of imply a whole kind of load of stuff on top of that. Well, we have to have the stats that will counter that. You know, it's effectively kind of puncturing the balloon of the inflated bit of disinformation that's created, that's blown up around this particular misused statistic. But fundamentally, also thinking back to, you know, the Brexit campaign and so forth, that wasn't won by the people who had the best statistics, right? It was won by people who connected with a sense of frustration, people who told a story, even if that was misleading. Our whole kind of our whole shtick, our whole thing is that we don't tell misleading stories. We tell stories about the better country that we can build. And so by being out and about and speaking to people from the heart, having the courage of our convictions to help connect the frustrations that people have with the very practical and real and tackling all of the issues, solutions that we have got as Greens in a way that makes a personal connection with people, that doesn't lecture at them, because again, that's what we can do, not go around and kind of speak at people through a loudhailer about how we've got this very, you know, we've got a few misleading stats. We have a conversational approach to politics, and I think that's central to how we can tackle the threat of a politics, i.e. reforms, whose style and content are, to my mind, alien to everything that I personally stand for in politics and what the Green Party stands for.
Thank you so much, Ellie. And I'm going to ask you both if you just want to say some some final words before I do some thanks and some next steps and things like that. But is there, so if you've got any final words, you just want to wrap up. So I'll go to Adrian first, and then back to you, Ellie, and then we'll start wrapping up. But thanks so much. And if you could just give us something to go away with, that'd be really great.
You, Johnny. Well, first of all, thank you to everyone for being here, to our speakers, and to everyone who's come along, and for all you're doing to support the Green Party in whatever ways you are in your community or nationally. What I would say is that we've heard some really inspiring stories tonight. We've heard how they're not about reinventing the rule book. In fact, they're about building on the established ways in which we have delivered huge growth. I mean, it's been a hockey stick trajectory the Green Party's been on in recent years in our growth in councillor numbers, winning in all corners of England and Wales, and now winning seats that people thought were unwinnable and said were unwinnable at the general election. It was the first election last year where we moved from having had one seat for lots of elections in a row to winning a set of 4 seats. And that wasn't a coincidence. It's because we had a clear, determined strategy that we set out from the beginning. When Cllr and I became co-leaders, we will have these target seats. We'll unite our strategy, our resources, our focus behind that. And everyone from around the country with fantastic teams came together to make that happen. That's what we now need to scale up. And these fantastic stories we've heard tonight from Sue, from Chloe, from Jonathan, remind us that we've got not only the tactics, not only the optimistic policy platform, but actually the political style and values and trust that people have in the Greens of having a different way of doing politics, where we will engage, we will offer real solutions, we will be honest, we will be ourselves, and we will really offer something different that people are looking for. So we've got to build on the fantastic successes we've had to achieve our very ambitious goals for the next phase of the party.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And Ellie, if you've got any final words for us, I've seen that some next steps and actions people can take in the chat, which is great. So if people want to have a look at that. Ellie, have you got a few final words before I go do the final thanks?
Thanks. Yeah. Well, my first final word is thank you to everybody who's, such a vital part of the success that we have had as a party so far. I know just how hard people work within the Green Party, campaigning. All of our victories, everything that we've won so far is built through all of that kind of hard work, that blood, sweat and tears, all working together. And I'm really kind of conscious that we're all sort of standing on the shoulders of giants, of the people who went before. We are all part of that kind of thread of creating a bigger and better, a stronger Green voice in politics in Britain. the thing that really strikes me is that we win elections as a Green Party when we are able to bring together the widest possible range of people. That's what we know. That's what Target to Win is about. That's what we have to do to win in a first past the post political system. And the way that we can do that is by building on the trust that we already have, by staying totally connected to our values and all of those values that connect with people across the political spectrum. And, you know, as Greens, I think we offer a really unique, we fill a really unique part of the kind of political ecosystem, if you like, and that's very well understood by people, and that trust is kind of rooted and connected in that. And the way that we win elections is by building that biggest possible team of activists and that biggest possible team of voters. You know, Adrian and I have got this strapline about together we win, and it's just so central to our DNA that it's something that we do by working all together. So thank you for everything that you do with that. Thank you to everybody who's been part of this event today as well. But Johnny, I think you're going to say some more thank yous, so I'll leave you to that.
Yeah, so thank you. So thanks so much, Ali. I do want to say a super big thank you to our speakers earlier, of Chloe Turner from Stroud, Sue Brathwaite from Worcester Greens, and Jonathan Chilvers. Really great to have you, inspiring the start to the session. It gave us some tangible hooks to really talk about. That was really, really helpful. I would like to thank Mark Redding for holding the tech together, because I'm really grateful for that. I can't possibly cope with that while doing this. So brilliant, thanks. And thanks everybody who has participated and joined in the session.